Okay, Johan, welcome to the Health Path podcast, and thank you for sparing some time to come and speak with me.
Hey, Alex, awesome to be here, and you're most welcome. I look forward to our deep dive into saunas.
Yeah, me too. I have to admit, it is one of my favorite activities. So I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more about this, and I guess how it can play a role alongside other modalities within both health optimization, but also kind of healing as well. So we'll obviously dive into some of that. But to begin with, do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit more and share a little bit of your background and what got you into sauna therapy?
Yeah, great, man. Yeah, absolutely. I'll start off probably with my childhood. So I'm German, as the name. Some of you might realize Johannes is not a very British name, but I've spent a fair bit of time in New Zealand and Australia and in the UK as well. And that was actually when we started the sauna journey, as I like to refer to it. But even in my sort of younger age, I was always interested in health. Like my grandma, she used to have her own organic garden, so we'd always make organic salads, and I would always prefer the salad over cake. And that was at the age of 12 or 13. Like, I love grandma's cake, don't get me wrong here, but there was always this passion of just being drawn, I think, to a more healthy lifestyle. And I think I realized quite young that whatever I put in my body, I could straight away feel that I would have more energy, I think, and I personally felt also in my early 20s, when I sort of entered my student time, we tend to lose this feeling. We tend to be disconnected with our body of, feeling like, okay, I eat this and I feel good, or I do yoga in the morning, I feel good afterwards. And I've had this experience quite at a young age, and I'm really glad that after my student time, I sort of got back a little bit on the healthy track. It wasn't unhealthy during my student times, but you drink and you party and you out that. So I've done all of that as well, which I think is great because you got to experience that to actually then go back to the health side, so to speak. And my background is actually engineering. So I did a bachelor's in engineering into focusing on renewable energies, carbon emission offsetting. So very much, very, very different, I guess, to the health perspective. And then while living in New Zealand, I sort of got into fasting. I've been raw vegan for a little bit, the keto diet, so all these trends. And in New Zealand, I met my business partner, Sebastian. He's also German, but he moved to New Zealand at the age of 24. Because he enjoyed the lifestyle a lot better. He thought like the German lifestyle, or sort of the vision of growing up, doing university and then, working full time, it just didn't really resonate with him. And he used to be on the conferences in LA. Some of you might know them. They're the Longevity Now conference. It was one of the really first health conferences with David Wolf, and it's probably 10, 15 years ago or so. And he got to know Clearlight, which is obviously a US-based infrared sauna company that has been, as I said, around for 22 years. And that was really into the health space. Like we'll do a deep dive, obviously, into EMF and ELF and whatever sauna therapy can do to the body. But essentially, we became friends in New Zealand, and then we literally just thought, hey, why isn't this brand in Australia and New Zealand? So we, spent a bit of time in the garage, built a website, and and found ways of selling it. And that was 7 years ago. And from then, I decided to move back to Europe. And now we sort of represent Clearlight Saunas International, which is essentially, we obviously promote Clearlight Saunas, but we're on our own company on our own terms. And we do it in the UK, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, and the rest of Europe. And it's been a fantastic journey, getting to know so many amazing people like yourself, and sort of learning about these new therapies, on top of, I guess, sauna therapy, like, red light therapy, salt therapy, halo therapy. And it's a beautiful space and a beautiful industry to be in at the moment. I mean, COVID obviously isn't great, but I feel there is a big shift happening and people taking more responsibility of their health, or just questioning the status quo, like, now that you can't actually fly to Ibiza, or, can't actually spend much time on holiday somewhere outside of your country. People are looking at what else can I do to improve my health. And I certainly believe that the sauna are a major part of that. And I think that's why I'm here today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think Gosh, it's probably back when I started training as a personal trainer. I spent 3 months out in Cyprus doing the diploma, and we were lucky to be trained sort of, I guess, attached to a spa. So we had 3 months of a lot of sort of sauna therapy, and that was traditional sauna therapy.
Mm.
But I've certainly experienced my fair share of far infrared sauna therapy as well. So that might be a nice kind of cue into what are the differences, because I think most people are probably more familiar with the traditional sauna. And
Yeah,
obviously there are some key differences that we want to be mindful of. So what are some of
sure.
the big things there?
Sure. I guess maybe as a bit of a background story, most
Mm.
people don't know, but saunas in general have been around for literally thousands of years. Like, back in India, they used to do those sweat lodges, which was essentially like a hut made from from cotton or any sort of anything they would really found to actually shelter the space. And then they would use these hot stones. They would actually put them in a fire for a couple of hours straight, then actually move them into the tent, put hot water onto them, and literally like make hot air. And they used to sit in there for hours, actually making it like really a spiritual practice, like the ancient Indians did that as well. And then what nowadays, I think what most people know is obviously the traditional, or the hot rock, the Finnish sauna, as some people refer to it as well, which in essence is a room, like a sauna space or a sauna room, with an oven or a stove actually on there. And obviously, it uses electricity, and then it really produces hot air. Like normally you have sort of 60 to 110 degrees Celsius. In Russia, they call it the banya. You sometimes even exceed 110 degrees Celsius. I was in Russia in February, and it was so hot, but it was a great experience, like from a cultural perspective. And then, people go in there for 5 to 15 minutes. They do 1, 2, 3 rounds, take a cold shower afterwards, read a book. And, I think we all know that feeling, or most of us at least know the feeling of like feeling really refreshed and rejuvenated when we go out. Like, I'm really tired. I can go to bed right after I've had a sauna. And with an infrared sauna, as the name says, it uses infrared technology, which is essentially a heat wave. So you still have a sauna space. So you would still have like a 2-person or a 3-person sauna room. But instead of having one oven in there or one sort of stove, you use infrared panels. Now, these panels can be made from different materials. It can be carbon, it can be ceramic, it can be magnesium, all sorts of things, and, the different strengths and weaknesses of each material. But essentially, instead of heating the hot air, you heat this material. And then this material has certain characteristics that then produce a certain infrared wavelength at certain intensities. Now, you've mentioned far infrared, for instance, which is one type of the infrared spectrum. And over time, so you need sort of 15 to 20 minutes to preheat up the sauna, and then you sit in there, you got these heater elements, these heater panels literally all around you. Over time, your body starts to heat up, like you actually start sweating. But the difference is it's not through hot air, but it's actually through the infrared that is being absorbed by your body. And therefore, if you look at the temperatures in an infrared sauna, you'll have temperatures of between 40 and 60 degrees Celsius. Like most people say, wow, that's not really hot at all. I'm not going to sweat. But because it's a more gentle heat and it's not hot air, your body actually heats up from the inside out. Like it's almost like a soft but healthy microwave effect. And when people question or wonder actually what it feels like, now imagine you sit in front of a bonfire and you sort of feel the nice heat sort of on your face from the fire. Or imagine it's a really nice and hot and sunny day and you sort of lie on the grass and you really feel the sun on your skin, and over time you'll start sweating. Essentially, it's the same feeling in an infrared sauna. It's a really nice, warm and gentle heat. But over time, when you're surrounded by this heat, you start sweating. And it's beautiful because it's really gentle. Like, some people always say, I can't do saunas. It's too stinking hot for me. I get headaches from it, or I feel dizzy. And it's also more effective because it's a more gentle way. You stay in there longer, but your core temperature actually goes up and you develop an artificial fever. And that's sort of in brevity, I think that's how the two sauna types differ. Both are great. I love them both. But if I could choose, for me, it would be the infrared sauna. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've mentioned sort of there are different wavelengths as well. So am I right in saying there are different benefits to each wavelength, sort of the far, near and mid?
Yeah, I think, I mean, they all work differently in terms of sort of how they are being absorbed by the body. In terms of the benefits, you know, you typically look at what a sauna does and a sauna therapy does for you. There are certain benefits that are more strongly linked to certain types of infrared. So, and maybe it just makes sense to quickly look at them. So you've mentioned far infrared, which is sort of the beginning of the spectrum. It's a very gentle heat. Like it was, I think it was actually researched in the late 70s, 1970s in Japan, where people actually were using it in hospitals to warm newborn babies, for instance, right? So it is not like a recent development. It's been around for a number of years and has been proven to be absolutely safe. And it's really gentle. You can touch the heater. You won't burn yourself. It feels really nice and warm. But if you have enough of these panels around you over time, you'll still sweat and your core temperature will go up, because essentially that's what you want in a sauna, right? Like, although it's an infrared sauna, you still want to sweat. So therefore, it's sort of the compromise. Then you have middle infrared, which is essentially a shorter wave, but it has more energy, it has more power, and it feels hotter, and therefore it actually penetrates deeper into the body. So whereas far infrared sort of is being absorbed by the upper layers of the skin, middle infrared essentially goes a level deeper. So it'll sort of go through the upper layers of the skin, and therefore it'll actually provide a deeper penetration, and also a deeper, like a more intense contribution to your overall heating up. And near infrared is, again, it's a much shorter wavelength, but it has a lot more energy in the wavelength itself, which means it penetrates even deeper. And some of the benefits that have been seen with near infrared are, for instance, wound healing, because it sort of really goes deep into the skin and it sort of supports the wound healing by bringing more nutrients or more blood and oxygen to the wound. But also for joint and muscle healing. So, you know, some people that really heavily exercise, or some people that have sort of a stiff back, you know, they have a really physically straining job and they come home, get a sore back. For those people, near infrared, or the full spectrum, what we call it, which is all three wavelengths together, is probably superior, because you know, you still have the gentle heat and it feels nice, but at the same time, you get this deeper penetration, this deeper sense of heating up, which affects your muscles, your joints in a really positive way.
Amazing. So do we know whether, sort of from a body core temperature perspective, is there comparison between infrared saunas and traditional? So are we getting kind of, would you say that we're getting to that same sort of heat internally, so to speak, even though externally it might be a cooler room, as it were?
It's a good point. I haven't actually seen like a side-to-side comparison, in all honesty.
Okay.
I think that would be amazing to see. The one thing that is obviously different is that you can stay in an infrared sauna for much longer because it doesn't feel as intense.
Okay.
Whereas in a traditional sauna, because you have these really hot air temperatures, I think the maximum that people probably do is between 20 and 30 minutes. After that, they will feel dizzy because it's just so stinking hot. And I've seen some numbers from Rhonda Patrick, who's a US-based researcher. She's really like the most advanced, the most sophisticated person when it comes to sauna therapy in the US. And she said that on average, I think the core temperature goes up by 0.8 degrees Celsius within 20 minutes in a traditional sauna with, I think it was 80 Celsius. And we've done some research ourselves where we, I think, tested around 100 people. And on average, we measured it over a session duration of 40 minutes. So it's twice as long. But while it's still intense and you still sweat, you don't actually get the same feeling of dizziness, because it's not really the hot air, but actually like you literally heat up from the inside out. And the temperature went up by 1.4 degrees Celsius. So actually, you almost double as long in there because you can. And the temperature almost goes up twice as much. So you could say it's an almost linear trend.
Yeah.
And if you look at that in terms of the fever, or a fever of the body, like it's a pretty considerable fever. So I think normally you'd say like 36.9 is around the body temperature. And if you add 1.4 on that, you're at 38.3, 38.4. Like if you measure a fever, like, use a fever thermometer, you would consider this a fever. And No, this is not dangerous. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I think, fever is one of the natural mechanisms to essentially strengthen the immune system, to produce more white blood cells, and to really trigger the autoimmune response of your body. And you essentially do that. We call it heat stress. And if you look at that, I mean, you sit in the sauna, you relax, you sit in there for 20, 30, 40 minutes. But what actually happens in your body is phenomenal. And fever is one of these effects where you can literally train your body to become more resilient through heat stress, because you train your body to get this fever. And if the more often you do it, the less people get sick. Like, that's what we hear all the time. It's like, hey, I've been doing my sauna 3 times a week. I'm not getting sick anymore. And it's the same with exercise or lifestyle. You need to do it repeatedly. Like, you need a routine around this. Otherwise, if you just exercise once a month, probably won't see any results, right? But it's the same with the sauna. If you do it 2 or 3 times a week and you really work on having a routine, and that can be as simple as, okay, I go to bed at 10, I hop in the sauna at 9:30, I do a cold shower afterwards, and I'm at bed at 10:05, and I have a sleep. And that's as simple as a routine, because it's, you're not physically moving the body, you're literally relaxing, and you can read a book, you can meditate and all that stuff.
Yeah. And I know I've kind of read some research around sort of the cardiovascular benefits, and sort of it being compared to essentially a workout ultimately, because of some of the stuff that's going on. It is incredible.
Yeah, 100%. I think there was actually, you might have read that, there was a long time study, I think over 20 years in Finland, where they looked at more than 2,000 men who did the sauna like 3 times a week, or up to 4 or 5 times a week. And if people were using like 2 to 3 times a week, I think their risk of all-cause mortality went down by 25 or 20%. And the interesting part is obviously that you can't really decipher whether it's through the benefits of saunas or whether it's a lifestyle change. Without a doubt, I think if someone's really having a hectic job and, it's really stressed, which I think we all know, because that's just life essentially. But if you then if you take the time and you do a sauna, and, you do something great for your immune system and you de-stress, I mean, 25% all-cause mortality is substantial. And that includes Parkinson, it includes other autoimmune diseases. And, the cardiovascular benefits are even more extreme, because, as you rightfully said, while you sit in there, like, everything in your body happens faster. Your heart has to pump more blood. It's literally a workout for your cardiovascular system. And over time, blood pressure is being regulated. But also your heart is just getting used to this heat stress and to this internal workout, essentially.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I guess before we go into some of the additional health benefits and what might be contributing to that, I guess one of the big questions that comes up when people are on this area is what you mentioned earlier, the sort of EMF, ELF elements of things as well. So do you want to just sort of introduce this concept and I guess some of the benefits of Clearlight saunas in regards to this area?
Sure. So EMF stands for electromagnetic frequencies. Some people, when they speak about EMF, they sort of mean all sorts of electroradiation, or sort of dirty electricity radiation. But technically, EMF stands for electromagnetic frequencies. And essentially what it is whenever a current flows, now this could be in our computer that we're just looking at the moment, or obviously when you're in a sauna, or when you drive an electric car, there's always electricity flowing from one direction to the other, because that's obviously what drives it. And then you have what you call an electromagnetic field around it. Now, some of us might have heard this in physics, and you can map it out. It has a direction, and the stronger the current, the bigger the electromagnetic field is. And what the World Health Organization, and obviously lots of other researchers and independent organizations, have found out is that high concentrations or high levels of EMF have an effect on our health. And this differs. Like, for some, they don't sleep well. For some, they get really, they get really stressed. I think some even go as far as saying that it may actually cause cancer. I couldn't confirm that, but there are all these theories out there. And what is so great about it is that it used to be a theory a couple of years ago, but now, organizations such as the World Health Organization, they have a section on the website where they explicitly, speak about it. There's, I think, a global project that aims to stop 5G because of its health, health effects not being 100% clear. And I think what we can take out of that is, like, if we sleep at home, we don't want to sleep on a Wi-Fi router. Like that's the most simple metaphor I think that everyone can imagine, and obviously getting the feeling of that, okay, this isn't right, this isn't healthy. And if you look at an infrared sauna, it's such a problem because while you sit in the sauna, you have literally heaters all around you, like literally 360 degrees. Now, if there's nothing done about it, you literally sit in really strong electromagnetic fields, which can be potentially harmful for your body. What you're actually trying to do something beneficial for your body. You want to de-stress, you want to detoxify, you just want to chill out, really. And therefore, what Clearlight has done around 9 years ago is they've addressed the problem by inventing a heater. We call it a true wave heater. It's a certain material combination, but essentially what it is, it's a heater on one side from A to B, and on the back side, it's another heater on the opposite side. And this means that the electromagnetic fields actually cancel each other out. And I think therefore I'm really proud to say that Clearlight is probably at the moment the infrared sauna company with the lowest EMF levels in the sauna. It's not so much a problem of traditional saunas because, you don't have these infrared heater elements all around you, but you have one central stove in the front that's probably a couple of, 1 to 3 meters away from you. But in an infrared sauna, it's a substantial problem. And unfortunately, the industry isn't regulated. So there are no benchmarks, there are no regulations from government, but everyone can just pretty much build their sauna. And, you think you go in there and then eventually you hear about EMF, you measure up your sauna and it's shockingly high. Like the rule of thumb is around 3 milligauss. That's what it's measured in. We've seen some saunas that exceed 100 or 150 milligauss.
Wow.
Which is substantial. It's more than 100 times, almost 100 times actually of the threshold of concern. And ELF, that's the second term that you've mentioned, stands for extremely low frequencies or electrical fields. That's what is also being used often. It's essentially the same logic. Whenever you have a current, you also have an electrical field. It's not electromagnetic, therefore the unit is different, but and there's not as much research on this topic, but the theory or the hypotheses are the same, meaning that high amounts of ELF can be potentially harmful for your body. And therefore, we're at the moment the only manufacturer worldwide who's also addressed this topic by trying to reduce the number of or the levels of ELF in your sauna. And I think as a rule of thumb, whenever you're exposed to high electricity, just, maybe look at that, try to position the Wi-Fi router far away from you. If you're in an electric car, you may want to measure it up because I've heard they're shocking. I haven't actually measured it. But just try to reduce, try to reduce it a little bit when you're exposed to it.
Yeah, I think it's one of those areas that I haven't done a huge amount of reading on, but I recently read, I'm going to forget the author's name, but it was the Tinfoil Guide to EMFs, which is a really great book for people if they're kind of starting out and wanting to learn a little bit about this, because he just breaks it down into very simple information around how these things are sort of tested and the fundamental flaws within the testing process that are then saying these devices are safe. So it was really interesting to read around, how they evaluate, I guess, EMF, or the correct term, it might not be EMF with cell phones, for example, and the size of the head that they're assessing it on. It's actually not on the ear, it's a couple of inches away from the ear. So even down to how we're assessing whether these things are safe, there seems to be flaws within the system.
I agree. I think, to me, it's a big concern because, people know about it and people talk about it, but it's not being addressed. And I think, on the phone, it's one thing, like you could use a headset and use it sort of, further away from you. But I really think like if people use an infrared sauna for health reasons, and then, you have these tons of EMF in there and people don't know about it, and they wonder actually why they don't feel good or why it actually doesn't support their health journey. It's frustrating. And I think therefore we're trying to set a new standard and just trying to bring this awareness to customers.
Yeah, definitely. Brilliant. Okay, and before we kind of dive into the health benefits, Johannes, is there anything else that you think would just be good to touch on in regards to sauna therapy and anything that we've missed so far?
No, I think the health benefits section is great. I would really love a deep dive because, Yeah, health and wellness, I think they move closer and closer together. And therefore, if we could maybe do a bit of a deep dive here, that's great. In terms of saunas or infrared saunas, maybe do a bit of research. I mean, obviously, when we dive into the health benefit section, we'll obviously talk more about it. But I would say I try to sweat once a day. Like that's my rule of thumb, whether it be it through a workout or be it through sauna. I mean, ideally I would want to sweat twice a day. In reality, it's probably once a day, either through yoga or through my sauna, and just give it a try. Like really try to, give your body the option to sweat, because I feel like in modern society at the moment, sweat is like one of these, it has a really bad vibe. Like,
Yeah.
people look at you and you're like sweating. And then obviously if you don't take a shower, it might actually smell. But what the skin is our largest organ. Like if we don't actually train and if we don't actually use it for sweating, our skin will get blocked. And we'll talk about detoxification aspect. But if we can't sweat, we can't really detox that well, because a big proportion of the toxins, and exiting the system when sweating is through the skin. Like blood and sweat analysis has shown that. And therefore, I would just like to encourage everyone to maybe, take a challenge, like see whether you can sweat 5 days in a row. So even if it's just 3 days, like, take a hot bath and, try to break a sweat, or go to the public sauna and sweat, or try to do some cardio, try to do some HIIT training if you can, if you're mobile enough. But just empower the sweating, because it's a good sign. It shows that your body and that your skin is healthy. And I always have this topic of like, oh, but then what if I sweat? And I say, well, great, then you sweat. Like that's the way it's supposed to be. Our ancestors were sweating too when they were hunting, right?
Right.
And that will be probably my, I'm really passionate about that. And I just really try to embrace that. Yeah.
I think you're the first person I met who's passionate about sweating.
Look, I mean, I think it might be linked to the job, obviously. And if I'm out at dinner, I don't like to sweat. I get it. But I think you have to get used to that. And I think it's really important to remember that sweating is healthy, that sweating is the way our bodies were made to work. And I hear this from so many people that they can't sweat, through hormonal issues or
Right.
a lack of mobility. And it's substantial, because as I said, like the skin is our biggest organ.
Yeah, no, it is a really good point, because I was going to say, until you just touched on it there, that I would actually say that one of the most common symptoms that I see in clinic is people don't sweat and they're constantly cold. My clients are always the ones that in the gloves, scarf, jumper, and as you say, sweating in, I guess, warmth ultimately is kind of a sign of resiliency, vitality, and I guess a healthy life force, for want of a better term. And this idea of then finding ways to induce that if we're running cold for whatever reason that may be is incredibly important. And that's where obviously I think sauna therapy has actually quite a really helpful role to play in people who struggle at this point in time. And I've been there. I certainly found when I've had periods of access to a sauna sort of daily, I noticed that my sweat rate massively changed. So I could be in a sauna for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and I'd have like one droplet of sweat and everyone else would be sweating massively. But over time, I definitely noticed a real shift in sort of my capacity to sweat, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly in line with what we hear from customers. Like we constantly get the call, hey, Johannes, the sauna isn't hot enough, I'm not sweating. And I'm like, dude, it's not supposed to be that hot. And trust me, you'll sweat. Just give your body like a solid 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sessions. And, we don't hear back from these often. Like if we hear back from them, it's like, oh man, you're right. Like, I actually started sweating. And I know this from friends as well. Like I have some friends that sweat instantly and some that don't at all. And it's really linked to exercise. Like the people that don't sweat, or to sauna use in general, it's not just exercise, but the people that don't actually work out, the people that don't use a sauna, they don't sweat. And it's natural, because how should our body actually learn this or keep doing that if we're not training them to do it? And I think heat therapy or sauna therapy is a great way. Cold showers in addition to that is also great, because you're essentially making your body more resilient, not through heat but through cold, which can actually help help you be cold less. Like it's as simple as that. Start taking cold showers if you're cold too often, and you'll see your resilience goes up. It's hard, I get it, but it works.
Yeah.
And it's the same with sauna therapy.
Yeah, definitely. Excellent. So with all of that in mind, how would you like to, I guess, introduce the main topic of today around sort of the health benefits?
Um, I mean, when people ask me like, what is an infrared sauna good for? I think it's a really difficult question to answer, because essentially the question should be, what is an infrared sauna not good for? So the topic of health benefits is really vast. I am a big advocate of stress and routines, like, because I, obviously run the company. We're sort of 25 to 30 employees. I get stressed too. Like, I'm not a master of that by all. I think, that's my biggest weakness at the moment, that I tend to get stressed. But then the sauna actually helps me to overcome that by just knowing that, hey, this is my safe space. This is actually where I have self-care, and I just use that. So that will be one of the topics I would love to talk about a little bit. Detoxification is a big one, a really big one. Heat shock proteins is probably a little bit more intense, but then I know that some of your clients or some of your listeners, they also struggle from chronic diseases. It could be arthritis, it could be Lyme's disease, I think, which is a really big topic at the moment. And I think those are all topics that I would love to talk about.
Yeah. And I guess from just a personal perspective, it falls under sort of detoxification to some degree, but I see a lot of clients with mold illness from sort of water damaged buildings and things like this. Yep. And obviously, yes, we can pee and poo these toxins out, but sweating is there for a reason. And there's just another mode that we can consider when we're detoxing these things.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think mold is a scary one. Yeah.
Yeah. It's incredible. I see it almost on a daily basis now. It's become wow. I seem to be attracting clients, I think, where there's an underlying mold issue. But going back to this list, starting, I guess, with the stress management, and I guess, there's I can only assume some research that probably looks at it from sort of an autonomic nervous system perspective. So starting to understand some of the actual mechanisms rather than it just feeling nice and that being relaxing. It is actually having an impact neurologically within that sort of stress system.
Definitely. And I think, in really simple words, like most people have probably heard of the fight and flight mode. Like it's the, I think essentially the way I look at it, if someone is working on the computer, probably a stock trader is constantly under fire, is constantly chased for, calls or sells or puts or options or whatnot. I don't know this stuff, but the way I look at it is like someone who's like really lifted their shoulders, constantly under stress. And it's obviously the mind that is stressed, but mind and body, they go hand in hand, right? Which means like if you are constantly under stress, your physiology in the body actually changes, like your posture changes, your shoulders are actually moving to the front, and what happens on a cellular level is really interesting too, because I think we have a rise in nitrous oxide, which essentially can be quite poisonous over long term for the body. Essentially, you reduce the cell frequency, the cell activity, which means like you literally slow down your body and you literally take away some of the energy of the cells. And that's sort of what happens to stress. And I think, I'm not a numbers person, but I'm sure some people have actually done some calculations of how many people each year actually die from heart strokes or, heart failures and strokes. And most of that, I would think, I don't know, but it's probably linked to stress. Because at some point your heart is just failing because it can't deal with this constant fight and flight mode. And I would think that everyone knows what I'm talking about. I think we all know the feeling of really being stressed, like coming home, not finding ease, trying to meditate doesn't work. And, then probably the only thing helps is reading a book, going for a walk. And I think there are different ways to combat stress. That's not the topic here, but essentially in an infrared sauna, like the way I use it, like you go in, you can't use your phone. I mean, you can in theory, but that's not what's supposed to what you're supposed to do. You can listen to meditation music. You can read a book if you want. You can put the light on, and you can't answer calls in the sauna. You can't write emails in the sauna. It should be your safe space, right? And you literally, and it might feel really difficult in the first 15 minutes to sit still. But over time, the heat actually can help you to get out of this fight and flight mode into more of a relaxing mode, like you're literally de-stressing. And if you take a cold shower after that, you'll probably be a lot happier. Like, you can't be sad when you've had a cold shower. And, you know, it's the same with the sauna. You probably can be sad when you've had heat therapy, because it's so intense. Like, you can't constantly think about stuff because you're focused on sort of making sure that you're actually sweating and that you're sort of, you know, surviving essentially the sauna session to then have a cold shower. And
right.
I think, you know, doing it in a regular way is key. Like, it's, you know, it doesn't just help to do it, you know, once a month. Like, it's the same with exercises, the same as yoga and meditation. It takes practice. And therefore, I'm a big fan of using the sauna as a way to combat stress. And I feel like if you look on, you know, at other manufacturers globally, it doesn't matter if it's in the UK, Ireland, or the US, little to no people speak about stress. And I get it, because it's, you know, you can't measure it, you can't heal stress essentially, such as you can do arthritis, because it's a constant thing. But I think it's substantial, and I think it's really the health concern in modern world, like people being constantly stressed because it's more demanding, it's faster than ever, computing power is increasing, and therefore I certainly use the sauna as a bit of a way to combat stress together with meditation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then just sort of kind of combining the two together. I love going into a sauna and doing just some diaphragmatic breathing while doing some meditation, and just kind of making the most of it ultimately, I guess.
I think that's exactly right, because you can use the time differently. Like, it's not that you go in the sauna and you can't do anything else. You can do breathing, you can read a book, you can do meditation, you could even do singing, or, you know, if that makes you happy, why not? You know, dancing is probably tricky, but, you know, you could do it as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And then I think the detox side of things is another really interesting topic, because I know that obviously sort of the naturopathic worlds and the integrated medicine, functional medicine worlds have been talking about this for quite some time ultimately, but I'll admit that I think it's probably only been the last year when I fully acknowledged the significance probably of this, whether we're talking about molds and mycotoxins or heavy metals, etc. So do you want to kind of just expand on the detox side of things with infrared sauna?
Sure. And I think it really, you know, you really have to look at it in a recent or in a modern perspective, as you rightfully said. Like, you only got it a year ago, and I probably got it a year or two ago. I think it's pretty similar. And I'm not a big fan of saying everyone's toxic. Like, by all means, I think if you think you're toxic, it's a pretty challenging mindset to have. Like, you know, yes, some people are, you know, have higher doses of toxins, and they have to do something about it. But by no means, please think that you're necessarily toxic. But if you look at sort of, you know, modern food, even if you eat organic, like, you get so many pesticides, you know, emissions from cars, from industry are sort of all over the air. Pollution is really driving everything up massively. And then you hear stories of, you know, children toys not being regulated, and out of a sudden you find heavy metals actually in some of these parts, right? And we don't want to dive into the vaccine topic, which is another really hot iron topic, right? But there is some interesting correlations between, you know, high doses of heavy metals and microtoxins and health issues, like, you know, or diseases essentially. You know, I think it can start with a chronic fatigue syndrome. It can start with brain fog, people not feeling really conscious. I was exposed to mold myself, and I started developing allergies. You know, I was 14, so didn't really know that I was exposed to it, and neither did my parents. But half a year later, I started developing allergies, and we had to move out straight away because it really is dangerous. And an infrared sauna has gained a lot of popularity, certainly over the last 5 years, because I think people have identified the fact that an infrared sauna can be really effective in helping the body to detoxify. And I think around 2 years ago, I read a few articles that fire stations, professional fire stations in the US, they started putting infrared saunas into the fire stations. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Because, you know, obviously firefighters on a day-to-day basis, even if they're wearing masks and protection gear, they're exposed to high concentrations of really, really toxic particles in the air that they breathe in through work. And I think if you just Google firefighters cancer rates, you'll actually see that it's not a good trend. Like, you know, the cancer numbers have really skyrocketed. And that's obviously, it's a really extreme scenario. Like, not everyone is exposed to the same concentrations and the same materials or toxins as a firefighter is exposed to. But as you rightfully said, like mold is pretty, you know, so many houses nowadays have mold and so many people are dealing with that. You know, others actually have to deal with toxins, like be it through mercury fillings, which have shown to actually not to mess around really with your health, with your physiology. You get cadmium, you know, you get like all these really heavy metals, which in high concentrations have actually shown potential risk or, you know, be damaging for the human health. And that obviously sort of triggered quite a bit of research. I think in the 1990s already and 2000s, you know, there were quite a few studies that actually did sweat analysis, that did urine analysis, that did excretion analysis. And what they all found is that sweat can be a really effective way to detoxify. Now, it works with the sauna as well, but in more recent years, research has actually found that an infrared sauna can detoxify 4 to 5 times more effectively than a traditional sauna. And they assume that through this more gentle heat and through this sort of preheating of your body, the toxins that are primarily stored essentially in the human body fat and muscle tissue, they seem to be flushed out through sweat primarily. It's not just sweat, it's urine and excretion as well. But sweat seems to be a substantial driver in detoxification. And if we link it back to the metaphor or to the picture of you just coming home, sauna is preheated, you jump in, you relax for 45 minutes, you get all these amazing benefits, and at the same time you detoxify, you know, I mean, it is great. Like, it's really, really powerful symbol, or a really powerful picture of, you know, actually the combination of wellness and health together. And that's what is really, I think, what's really exciting me. There are a few more sophisticated detoxification protocols. You might have heard of some, like the Niacin detox protocol is one of them. It essentially uses really high doses of niacin, which is a certain vitamin. And there are Andy Cutler protocols that actually help people detoxify from heavy metals and mercury. And you can use supplements such as chlorella or a charcoal to actually flush or bind these toxins, because that's one of the other hypotheses, is that if you actually move the toxins in the body, they have to be entered out, and they ideally have to be bound through clay or a charcoal and then actually leave the body through excretion.
Yeah, it is really interesting, some of those protocols that are out there.
Have you done one? Or
I haven't actually. I started looking into utilizing niacin, but there's just, I think there's a little bit of debate ultimately, certainly over the dose and the potential risk of some of the higher doses of niacin that can be used. So I sort of, to be honest, stopped the research and stopped the idea and just went back to sauna.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah, it's I think for the right person, obviously it can be a great addition to that process.
Yeah.
Excellent. And am I right in saying that what you said earlier around with sort of the infrared sauna potentially not sweating as much? So I assume from a detox perspective and the fact that we're detoxing better potentially in an infrared sauna, that there is a degree of kind of peeing out some of these toxins as a result. And then hydration becomes, I guess, a huge thing as well.
That's not necessarily what I meant or said.
Okay.
If I said, so I'm sorry, but I don't think you can compare necessarily. You can probably, I mean, I haven't seen a comparison where someone used a traditional sauna or an infrared sauna, you know, on one day and the other one on the other day, and sort of actually really measured the amount of sweat. I know that in a sort of 30 minutes to 45 minutes infrared sauna session, you're sweating at least 500 milliliters, at least.
Okay.
You know, so that is substantial. And in terms of detoxification, it is primarily through sweat.
Sure.
But then obviously supported through the body's organs, such as urine, you know, excretion through urine. Urine and excretion. But sweat is a primary driver. Whether people necessarily sweat better or more in a traditional sauna versus an infrared sauna, I would doubt it, because I think essentially your core temperature goes higher in an infrared sauna. And therefore, and because you stay longer, my theory is that you would actually sweat more. I mean, it applies certainly for me. But as I said, I haven't measured that. And I think ultimately, you should really choose what feels good for you. Like, I'm an advocate of infrared saunas, but I do go to the traditional sauna once in a while, just because it's a more social thing with friends.
Yeah. No, that's great. I'm glad I clarified that, because I misunderstood in that case. Perfect. And then you mentioned earlier, and again, this is I think a really important topic when we think about some of the stats that are out there, and the rate of neurodegenerative conditions such as Alzheimer's.
Mhm.
And I know that there was a paper, I think, published last year, looking at sort of saunas or infrared saunas and the mechanisms that are going on with a reduction in things like Alzheimer's. So is there anything that you just want to touch on or expand in regards to that area of health?
Sure. I haven't read that study, so
I'll
you're
send
actually,
over.
yeah, that'd be cool. So therefore, on Alzheimer, I'm not 100% sure. I do know, and there are quite a few theories or hypotheses out there that links sort of the benefits certainly to heat shock proteins and the reduction in nitrous oxide. So, and I think heat shock proteins is a really interesting one because in brevity, what it is, it's a certain type of protein that exists in the body, and it gets activated when we have heat stress. Now, it could be through a really hot shower, but even that's unlikely because you would have to do it really, really long. But research has shown that you can actually have it activated through saunas or infrared saunas. And the research that I've seen is that you need a 0.8 degrees Celsius increase of core temperature, and then you activate those heat shock proteins. And essentially what they do is they are these little helpers in the body that actually repair our cells, all cells, like liver cells, muscular cells, blood cells. We get, I don't know how many millions or trillions of cells we get in the body, and they are all being supported through these heat shock proteins. And through this, essentially what we can do is we can increase the living span essentially of our cells, and therefore there's quite a bit of research going into heat shock proteins and longevity at the moment.
Okay.
And I would think that essentially if your body is better equipped to repair damaged cells, or to just make sure that they're functioning properly, your system is probably stronger or more resilient when it comes to diseases in general, autoimmune, all sorts of diseases, I would really think. And that's a pretty hot topic at the moment. I've seen some of the correlations between Alzheimer and Parkinson and sauna use. But again, the studies that I've seen, it wasn't possible for the studies to make a referencing point on whether it's really through the sauna benefits or whether it's the lifestyle thing. And that's a really interesting topic that I would probably really like to educate myself a little bit better on, if the research has come up with a conclusion here. But there are the synergies that actually show it can be beneficial. But whether it's again through the metabolistic processes or the physiology of the body actually triggered through heat stress, or whether it's through stress or the fact of lifestyle changes, that's a big question mark. Because if you look at that, someone who takes probably 5 times a week a sauna, I would think that they're more likely to also exercise well. I would think that they're probably more likely to also eat well. So you have all these cross correlations that make it really difficult to link the benefits to disease prevention.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I think for me, it's often about nudging the body in the right direction. So the more of these things we can do and the more consistent we can be with them, ultimately the better. And it's the same, I think, even when I'm working with clients who are unwell, it's still that sort of principle of not necessarily needing to sometimes, and sometimes just not being able to get to this idea of the root cause of their condition. Because it's the exact same thing as you've been saying there, really. It could be a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and it's all accumulated to a point where there's now dis-ease or an imbalance physiologically. So I love that idea of taking just a broad perspective to the best of our ability and just nudging things in the right direction consistently. So yeah.
I think that's great. And and you probably know that better than anyone, Alex, like if someone's really sick and they're immobile and they struggle with that, like there's no way you get them to do yoga. Like there's no way you get them to do like a cardio or a full body workout. Like it's just off the table. Like people are in pain, and that's what we hear a lot as well, is like, people want to get healthy, but they're struggling. Like, and then, if you want to do yoga with them, I mean, how can they if the leg is stiff and they can't even bend it properly,
Right.
And I think then the sauna can actually be a really great way, because essentially what you're doing is like you're sitting in there. You can be immobile, you can be in pain, you can still probably use a sauna, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an infrared sauna. It's really gentle on the body, and yes, it has great health benefits, But if you don't have an infrared sauna, try to use a normal sauna, because it can also be beneficial. And then over time, I would think that you get more energy. It's probably hard for the first couple of times, but this, your body will react to that. Like if you nurture, if you care for your body through saunas, through exercise, through meditation, your body will thank you. And that's what we hear a lot, is where people are in pain and they use the sauna, and it's part of the recovery process. And then once they sort of manage to, do some pain mitigation and to sort of work maybe also on the psyche, in terms of, okay, I could probably do a soft run, or I could probably increase my walks around, around my house by 500 meters, then I think that's a starting point. And that's what we hear a lot from customers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I imagine just that, what you were explaining about these heat shock proteins and the role they play within the lifespan of a cell, that has to be a mechanism really that is contributing to a lot of these different health benefits from sauna therapy. What came up for me there was autoimmune conditions. You mentioned arthritis earlier, and the benefit that some people can experience by using infrared sauna therapy. And I imagine that's, again, just one of the reasons why.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, because we haven't talked about inflammation. Like, I think this is, people, and, I think it is one of the root causes, certainly, for a number of diseases out there, including arthritis, which essentially is obviously a chronic inflammation in joints. It can be in the body, but it can also just be in some part of the body. And if you look at sort of nitrous oxide and the way it sort of regulates or deregulates sort of the cellular activity, and same with heat shock proteins, like if you actually get these proteins out there and they're active, they'll repair cells. Like they literally do the job of making sure that that the cells are more vibrant and they have more energy. And if something is heavily inflamed, be it through food or be it through immobility or be it through toxins, like your body isn't functioning properly. And I think that's where the sauna can help. And yes, it may not be like the number one solution to that. It's probably a combination of different things, but it certainly does more good than it does bad for you, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Johannes, I'm mindful of time. I said I was going to keep an eye on the time, and I haven't. But is there anything that you would like to sort of conclude with or re-emphasize for our listeners?
I think a few different things. So if you are interested in saunas, infrared saunas, and its health benefits, like, go on YouTube, listen to this podcast. There are a few great videos. Rhonda Patrick speaks about it. She has also been on the podcast with Joe Rogan. He's obviously one of the biggest guys out there. We got a really great section on our website. It's infraredsauna.co.uk, where we list actually a number of studies, and it's sort of ordered by topic. So you'll some on chronic, on cardiovascular health, some on detoxification, some on inflammation, and we sort of link to external studies or to external articles. So it's not just the research that we've done. And I think that's really important to mention, because, yes, obviously we sell saunas, but the ambition also of the podcasting is to bring more education and to bring more knowledge actually on this topic. So, that will be my number one tip. If you really want to read more about it, there is a ton of research and a ton of knowledge on the internet. We're on this podcast as well. If you do want to buy a sauna, do your research. Like, there are companies out there that sell them for £1,000, but everyone that has sold a product before, if the product costs £1,000 and there's 20% VAT on it, there's shipping, etc. included, and the sauna can't cost more than $100 or $200 when they make it. That gets really tricky. Like, if you really want to have a non-toxic sauna that's low EMF, that's really doing something for your health, you just can't get it for that money. And that will be my number one consideration. If you really want to work on your health and you can afford it, do your research. We have a section on our website that is called the Infrared Sauna Buying Guide, where we are not presenting our product, but instead we try to give you the questions that you need to ask yourself, as well as other people, to come to a conclusion of what sauna you want. And if so, what questions you need to ask, other companies in order to really figure out whether it does good for your health. That will be my second recommendation. And the third one is what I'm really excited about with Clearlight at the moment, is that we as a sauna company, or we as a health and wellness company, essentially the sauna is always going to be a sauna, but what we're trying to do is to develop the sauna into like a 5 or 6-in-1 health and wellness system. Now, some of you probably remember that when the smartphone came out, it was great because you had a notebook, you had a phone, you had a contact list, you had an SMS function, a texting function, everything in there essentially becoming one device. And that was a beautiful thing about a smartphone. Nowadays, I think it's a big problem because we're all addicted essentially. But it's still really, really pragmatic. And I think with the sauna, we're trying to do something similar. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring various health-related technologies into the sauna so that you can combine them all together. Now you get the sauna, we're bringing in essential oils. You can use lavender to actually combat the stress. We're bringing in salt therapy, which is really, really beneficial for people with mold issues, because you essentially, breathing in high concentrations of salt to strengthen the lungs and the respiratory system. We're working on a red light therapy for photobiomodulation, which is another really interesting wellness therapy. And all of this stuff can go into the sauna. So my picture is you sit in the sauna, you do the light treatment, aromatherapy, salt therapy, you sweat, you read a book, you meditate. And that's what we're heading to at the moment. It's not to do it all just for the sake of doing it all, but to create the synergies. Because I personally feel people have less in this time, whether that's true or whether it's just a matter of prioritization. I won't talk about it. But I think the more synergies we can create, the better we can utilize the time, especially for health. Because, if someone works 13 hours a day in London, and they want to, get a bit of daylight, then there's no time anymore. And if you can do an hour in a sauna and you can do all this different stuff at the same time, I think it's really powerful. And that's what we're heading to at the moment. That's our vision. And just really giving back through the knowledge that we as a company have, really.
Perfect. And I guess one thing that might be useful to touch on, obviously people can head over to the website to learn more and see, but do you want to just quickly mention sort of the almost the type of sauna? So I mean, sort of, it's like a cabin sauna, and there's one person saunas, etc., just so people have an idea of what the range is like.
Yeah, it's a good point, because we haven't talked about it. Infrared saunas are so great because you can literally install and dismantle it, within an hour or two. They don't need 3-phase electricity. You just plug them. The smaller ones you plug into a normal household socket, so you can put them in your apartment. You can move with them again. Even if you live in a bigger city, and the smallest sauna only needs a square meter. It's literally 1 meter by 1 meter and by 2 meters height. But then we also got 5-person outdoor units, like they're 2.20 meters wide, 1.50 meters deep, up to 4 people can squeeze in there. And they obviously need like a bigger electrical outlet. But generally, the beautiful thing is because it's dry heat, you don't have any issues with mold or moisture. It's literally dry. There's no chance moisture can develop. That's why people put them in their apartments or in bathrooms. And then it's, I think 16 different models. They sort of differ in the quality, the price, the wood being used. But one of the big ones at Clearlight is that we give a lifetime warranty. So they are a little bit more expensive to what you find on the market. But, there's a service promise with it. And obviously a lifetime warranty. If anything breaks, even after 10 years, we'll be here and support you.
Amazing. Yeah, and they're beautiful. They're beautiful kind of cabins. So yeah,
designed really well. Absolutely.
Yeah, amazing. Johannes, thank you so much for sparing the time to come and chat. It's been really great to kind of dive into some of this stuff with you.
Likewise, Alex. I think it's been really fun. I love the topic, and love the conversations we've had.
Yeah, thank you.